Maybe this is just an excuse to finally build a guitar out of wood in my shop, but I've always been a fan of thinner guitars and I had some pretty cool wood sitting in my shop, so this sounded like a fun project to try out. The wood I'm using is called Black Limba. It's a West African hardwood, kind of similar to mahogany. These pieces have some really nice figure in them, so it should make an interesting looking guitar. So how thin am I going to go? Well, a standard Telecaster is about 1 3/4 inch thick, and a Les Paul is around 2 inches thick. For this guitar, I'm trying to go under an inch, maybe even quite a bit under an inch. I've got all the wood resawed and planed down. I'm gonna make this another neck through guitar, and you can see here on this middle piece how the grain is mostly in this upper section. So I'm gonna rip this thing down the middle so we can use just the section that has the figure in it. For the design of this guitar, I was somewhat limited by the size of the blank. It required kind of an odd design on the body because the length of the middle block was only around 37 inches long, whereas a more typical body shape would take around 38 inches at a minimum. So that's why this design has this sort of large cutaway at the end of the body. Now, I've built some absolute tanks of guitars in the past, and so I wanted to swing this one all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum and make it razor thin. At this point in the build, the body was about 21 millimeters thick, which is a little over 3/4 of an inch, and that's already pretty thin. There's a few different factors I have to account for when determining how thin I can get this guitar. The largest factor being the electronics, like the pickups and volume and tone pots, or any switches that I use in the wiring. I still want to be able to hide all the pots in a control cavity, as well as be able to use humbucker pickups. Structurally, I think I can go pretty thin with a hardwood like this before I begin to encounter issues with string tension and such, so that's not really a concern of mine. And finally, is a super thin guitar even going to be comfortable to play? I get a lot of questions in the comments about the way I mount my fretboards. I did this one as I typically do, drilling 2 guide holes through the fretboard into the blank. Sometimes I'll drill these guide holes under 2 separate fret slots, but this one had enough extra space around it just to put them on the outer edge. This helps a ton when gluing the fretboard on because once you apply pressure with clamps, the glue will make the fretboard slide around and it can be really difficult to get it properly aligned. Cutting out neck through guitars can be a little challenging even with a bandsaw. I think my bandsaw has around a 14-inch width capacity, but when you're cutting out a body with a neck on it that's over 3 feet long, you sometimes have to get a little creative with the cuts you make. I'm using humbuckers, but the ones I'm using are more low profile than standard ones. Normal humbucker pockets are routed to around 3/4 of an inch, which is basically the total thickness of the guitar already. Since I'm using more low profile humbuckers, I was able to get away with about 1/2 inch routes for the pickups. For the control cavity, I went pretty much as far as I could go, leaving a little over a 1/16 of an inch on the top. Even using short shaft control pots, they barely end up fitting with the control cover on. I use a router sled to reduce the thickness on the neck prior to shaping it. This speeds up the process of carving the neck a lot, and it doesn't take much time to do. and then I sanded in the radius on the fretboard with some 60 grit followed by 150 and 220. This takes maybe 20 or 30 minutes to do. While sanding the backside, I ended up sanding into maybe a 1.5 inch hole. It kind of looks like a wormhole or something, which was a bit of a bummer, but I used some of the sawdust along with super glue to fill it in, and at least it's hidden in the grain, so it ended up looking okay. Because the body is so thin and the pickup cavities are pretty shallow, I've got to use some unusual pickups for this guitar. I have no affiliation with this brand. I literally just chose these pickups because they were the thinnest humbuckers I could find online. They are passive humbuckers that are kind of exactly what I needed for this build. A normal humbucker pickup, as you can see, is too tall to use in this guitar. I'd have to completely route through the body in order to get it low enough. But with these pickups, they're so low profile that they'll work just fine. I debated doing an arm bevel on this guitar and just ended up doing it. I did it more for the appearance than anything. I wanted to get at least one razor thin edge on this thing. For the fretboard, I wanted to try dyeing the wood to make the grain stand out. My process for this is using aniline dye mixed in some water, and I'm basically just trying to lay down the black first so that it settles in the grain, and I'm sanding it back after each application, and then I'm going over it with whatever colors I choose afterwards. This one came out alright. The flame in the maple is definitely more noticeable after this process, which is the whole point of doing this. I sanded back the fret ends, which also sanded away a lot of the dye on the sides of the fretboard. I decided just to leave it as is because it can be pretty difficult to match the color to the top again, and I like the lighter sides of the fretboard more because it shows the black side dot markers better. For the finish, I just used True Oil over everything, the fretboard and all. I think I ended up doing over 12 coats of True Oil, which is one of my favorite finishes. And then I installed the hardware, did some fretwork and wiring, and we pretty much had a completed guitar. Okay, final measurement on it to see how thin I was able to get it, and it looks like we're at about 19 millimeters, which is just barely under 3/4 of an inch. I think I could even go slightly thinner than that with a few modifications to the electronics, but it's plenty thin already, so I'm pretty happy with how it came out. Only real blunder on this thing was this hole in the back that I sanded into and opened up, but I did fill it in, and it's not super noticeable anymore. Honestly, it feels pretty good to hold and play. It kind of sits right on your body, and I'd say it's pretty comfortable in my opinion. It's also super light, weighing in at 4.5 pounds, but the body and electronics weigh enough to not cause any neck dive, and this big bridge on it probably helps a bit too. It did end up being too thin for me to put any kind of switch in the control cavity, which is why I put 3 knobs in, which are 2 for the volume, 1 for the bridge, and 1 for the neck, and then a tone knob for both. The saddles on the bridge I have all the way lowered, and that puts the string height at the 12th fret at just over 1.5 millimeters, which is right around where I'd like it, but obviously it would need some modifications or different bridge to lower the string height even more. I'm gonna sell this guitar on my website along with the Hydro Dip guitar, so if you're interested in checking that out, the link will be in the description. I'll get to the demo of the guitar now so you can hear what it sounds like. I did force myself to drop tune this and play some kind of high distortion generic metal riffs at the end of the demo. Metal's not really my jam, so take it for what it's worth. As always, you can follow my work on Instagram at BrillsArt.